A single sentence changed the course of two lives forever, and neither of them realized it until years later. What began as an innocent joke during an ordinary sunny afternoon became a promise that survived heartbreak, silence, impossible choices, and the kind of pain that leaves invisible scars. By the time the truth finally came out, one of them believed it was already too late to fix everything, while the other had quietly spent years proving that love is sometimes less about perfect timing and more about never giving up on someone's heart. If you believe kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances can change lives, please like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. The warm spring sunshine filled every corner of the neighborhood park as families gathered around picnic tables, children chased colorful kites across the wide green field, and the sweet scent of blooming flowers drifted through the gentle afternoon breeze. It was the kind of day that made people slow down and appreciate simple moments. Among the laughter and cheerful conversations sat Rowan Mercer and Tessa Holloway, two longtime friends who had spent almost every weekend together for the past 3 years. Everyone around them assumed they were already a couple, but neither of them had ever admitted the feelings quietly growing beneath years of friendship. Rowan had become the dependable person everyone leaned on after losing his father at a young age. Responsibility had shaped him long before he was ready for it. He worked hard as a landscape designer, cared for his widowed mother every weekend, and rarely allowed himself to dream about a future that belonged entirely to him. He believed promises mattered more than feelings, and because of that, he often buried his own happiness beneath obligations that never seemed to end. Tessa was different in almost every way. She carried optimism like sunlight. She volunteered at the local animal shelter during her free afternoons, remembered everyone's birthdays without needing reminders, and somehow made ordinary conversations feel meaningful. Yet behind her bright smile lived an old fear of being abandoned. Her parents had divorced when she was a teenager, leaving her convinced that people eventually walked away, no matter how deeply they cared. Their friendship had grown through hundreds of ordinary afternoons just like this one. They explored farmers' markets, helped each other move apartments, celebrated promotions with coffee instead of expensive dinners, and comforted each other through disappointments no one else understood. Every memory quietly stitched their lives closer together. As they unpacked sandwiches and fruit from a picnic basket that Tessa had insisted on preparing herself, Rowan noticed she had once again remembered every tiny detail about his preferences. His favorite bread. The exact cheese he liked. The fresh strawberries she knew he could never resist. Even the homemade cookies his mother used to bake had been recreated after Tessa secretly asked for the recipe months earlier. He laughed while shaking his head, pretending to sound embarrassed even though the warmth in his chest was impossible to hide. He joked that she was acting like his wife already. Instead of laughing the way he expected, Tessa simply looked at him with gentle eyes that reflected both courage and vulnerability. A slow smile appeared across her face as sunlight danced through the trees behind her. Maybe she was practicing. For a brief second, the entire world seemed to pause. The distant laughter faded. The wind became still. Even Rowan's heartbeat felt louder than the sounds around them. He searched her expression for any sign that she was teasing him back, but all he found was quiet honesty. His heart wanted to answer immediately. It wanted to tell her he had imagined waking up beside her more times than he could count. It wanted to admit that every future he secretly pictured somehow included her smile waiting at the end of each difficult day. But fear spoke before love could. Fear reminded him that his mother depended on him. Fear whispered that he wasn't financially ready. Fear insisted that ruining their friendship would cost him the most important person in his life. So instead of saying what his heart begged him to say, he forced an awkward laugh and changed the subject. Tessa smiled politely, but something behind her eyes quietly dimmed. She never mentioned the moment again. The afternoon continued with pleasant conversations, shared desserts, and long walks beneath the bright blue sky, but an invisible distance had appeared between them. Neither of them could explain it. Both of them could feel it. Over the following weeks, life became unexpectedly busy. Rowan accepted a demanding project restoring several public parks across the county. The opportunity promised financial stability he had always wanted, but it required long hours and endless responsibility. Every afternoon that had once belonged to friendship slowly disappeared beneath deadlines and meetings. Tessa understood at first. She encouraged him. She celebrated his success. She reminded him to take breaks. Yet every message between them became shorter than the last. Every cancelled lunch quietly hurt a little more. Every promise to meet next weekend slowly turned into another apology. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Tessa visited the animal shelter alone. Rowan had promised to help organize an adoption event, but an emergency meeting pulled him away only an hour before it began. She smiled when she read his apologetic message, yet several volunteers noticed she wasn't as cheerful as usual. An older volunteer named Margaret gently sat beside her after the event ended. Without asking questions, Margaret simply shared something she had learned after 40 years of marriage. Love rarely disappears all at once. It usually fades beneath words left unsaid. Those simple words echoed inside Tessa's mind for days. She wasn't angry. She wasn't jealous of Rowan's career. She only wondered whether she had imagined the connection that everyone else seemed able to see. Meanwhile, Rowan buried himself even deeper in work, convincing himself that temporary sacrifices would eventually create a better future. He kept telling himself there would be time later. Time to explain. Time to confess. Time to ask her the question that frightened him because he already knew how much the answer mattered. Neither of them realized that life rarely waits for perfect timing. One bright Monday afternoon, Rowan finally cleared his schedule and decided he would surprise Tessa with lunch at her favorite cafe. For the first time in weeks, excitement replaced exhaustion. He even carried a small wildflower bouquet he had gathered himself from one of the parks his team had restored. As he approached the cafe entrance, he froze. Through the large front window, he saw Tessa sitting across from a well-dressed man about her age. They were smiling, talking comfortably, laughing together in a way Rowan hadn't seen for weeks. The bouquet slowly slipped lower in his hand. A painful thought settled into his heart before he knew anything about the stranger. Maybe someone else hadn't waited. Maybe someone else had found the courage he never had. Without walking inside, Rowan quietly turned around and disappeared into the busy afternoon crowd, never realizing that the man across from Tessa was not a romantic interest at all, but someone whose arrival was about to change both of their lives forever. I'll continue the story seamlessly in part 2, maintaining the same emotional tone and building toward a powerful ending. Rowan walked through the busy streets with the untouched bouquet still in his hand, convincing himself that leaving had been the right decision. Every step felt heavier than the last. He replayed the image from the cafe again and again, allowing his imagination to fill in details that were never there. By the time he reached his truck, he had already written an entire story inside his own mind. He believed Tessa had finally met someone who could give her the certainty he never had the courage to offer. Without realizing it, he had let fear make another decision for him. The bouquet remained on the passenger seat for the rest of the afternoon. When he finally arrived home, he placed the flowers in a glass of water instead of throwing them away. They reminded him of everything he wanted to say but never had. Across town, Tessa watched the cafe door several times, almost expecting Rowan to appear with his familiar smile and another apology about work. He never came. The man sitting across from her noticed the disappointment she tried to hide. His name was Everett Lawson, an attorney who specialized in estate planning. He had known Tessa's late grandmother for years and had contacted her about unfinished legal matters that required her signature. Their meeting had nothing to do with romance, yet from a distance it could easily have looked that way. Everett explained that Tessa's grandmother had left behind more than family heirlooms. She had also written several personal letters, each meant to be opened during important moments in Tessa's life. One envelope had her name written across it in elegant handwriting. Tessa carefully opened it after leaving the cafe and found words that immediately filled her eyes with tears. Her grandmother wrote that real love would never be measured by grand speeches or expensive gifts. It would be measured by consistency, sacrifice, honesty, and courage. She warned Tessa not to mistake silence for a lack of love, but also not to spend her life waiting for someone who was too afraid to choose her. The final sentence stayed with her long after she folded the letter. It reminded her that sometimes people lose the greatest blessings because they keep waiting for a perfect moment that never arrives. For several days, Rowan and Tessa exchanged only short messages. They remained polite, but the easy rhythm that had once defined their friendship was gone. Friends who knew them both noticed the difference immediately. They still cared deeply about each other, yet each believed the other had quietly moved on. Then another unexpected change arrived. Rowan's mother, Evelyn, called him one bright afternoon and asked him to visit after work. She looked healthier than she had in months, but there was unusual seriousness in her expression. She invited him to sit beside her on the front porch where warm sunlight stretched across the garden Rowan had planted years earlier. Without raising her voice, Evelyn admitted she had noticed how lonely her son had become. She confessed something that surprised him more than anything else she could have said. She had spent years encouraging him to focus on responsibility because she feared becoming a burden after losing her husband. But now she realized she had unintentionally convinced Rowan that his own happiness always had to come last. She gently held his hand and told him that parents never want their children to sacrifice an entire future for them. She reminded him that life keeps moving whether people are ready or not. Then she smiled through watery eyes and said the one thing Rowan had needed to hear for years. She told him to stop waiting and start living. Those words broke something open inside him. For the first time, Rowan admitted aloud that he loved Tessa. Not as a friend. Not as someone who might someday become important. But as the woman he wanted beside him for the rest of his life. Evelyn smiled with quiet relief, believing her son had finally stopped hiding from his own heart. The following afternoon Rowan drove to the animal shelter hoping to speak with Tessa. He rehearsed dozens of different apologies during the drive, rejecting every one because none of them felt honest enough. When he arrived, several volunteers greeted him warmly, but Tessa was not there. Margaret recognized the worried look on his face and invited him to help carry supplies into the building. As they worked together, she spoke with the calm wisdom that only years of experience seemed to bring. She explained that people often assume love disappears because no one says the right words. In reality, love is usually damaged by assumptions, fear, and silence. She never mentioned Tessa directly, but Rowan understood every sentence. Before he left, Margaret handed him a small envelope. She explained that Tessa had accidentally left it behind while organizing paperwork earlier that morning. Rowan intended only to return it unopened, but when he noticed his own name carefully written on the front, his heart nearly stopped. Inside was a folded piece of paper that Tessa had apparently written weeks earlier but never delivered. She admitted that she had almost confessed her feelings after the picnic, especially after teasing that maybe she was practicing to be his wife. She wrote that his laughter afterward made her believe she had misunderstood everything between them. She apologized if she had made him uncomfortable and promised she would never pressure him to feel something he didn't. The final line was simple. She hoped that someday he would find someone who looked at him the way she always had. Rowan read the letter 3 times before he could even breathe normally. Everything he believed about the cafe dissolved in an instant. He had walked away from the one person who had quietly loved him all along. He folded the letter carefully, held it against his chest, and understood that the greatest obstacle between them had never been another person. It had been fear. As he hurried toward his truck, determined to find Tessa before another misunderstanding stole even more time, he had no idea that she was standing only a few blocks away, facing a life-changing decision of her own, one that neither of them could avoid much longer. I'll continue seamlessly in part 3, where the misunderstandings are finally confronted, emotions reach their peak, and the story moves toward its heartfelt, satisfying conclusion.